McCabe served in the United States Coast Guard. He was an air survival man, petty officer, second class. He enlisted on August 1st, 1971, and served until August 2nd, 1975. He served 4 years. He started his service during the Vietnam War. He was stationed on a ship in the Pacific Ocean near Vietnam. After the war ended, he continued to serve in Astoria, Oregon during peacetime. He served on the deck force of a ship during the Vietnam War. He kept the ship seaworthy. Then after the war, he was an air survival man, where he jumped out of airplanes and helicopters to help save people at sea. McCabe learned how to keep ships afloat during the Vietnam War. Then he went to parachute school to learn how to jump out of airplanes and be dropped down out of helicopters. He also went to the ordnance school, where he learned about loading bombs and oxygen systems. He told of how he had his first parachute jump from an old airplane that was built in 1939. He was the first man on the plane, but the last guy off. He watched all his buddies jump first. It was like they were getting sucked out of a plane that was 3,000 feet high, traveling at about 200 miles per hour. After he jumped, he looked around and remembered to pull the ripcord. He said he wasn't scared at all.
Bell served in the National Guard for almost 24 years after he enlisted during the Vietnam War, retiring from the U.S. Navy in 1988. Before he enlisted, he was a junior at Boise High School. He said, "My family was skeptical at first, but they were relatively okay with me enlisting." He went to the Great Lakes for advanced training, and by that time he was already a senior rifleman. He said that boot camp was easier than I thought. One time we did 600 push-ups just to prove that we could. He was at the top of his classes when he transferred to Navy. His position in the Vietnam War was on the water when heavy gunfire would rock the ship. When he became a tank commander, he was in Italy fighting the Red Brigade, a terrorist group. He was commanding a tank, and his tank was the only one that was not hit. Now he is retired and has several medals of bravery and honor.
Would you like to learn about a veteran named John Williams? John Williams was born in Montana in 1944. He is 75 years old today, but he was 20 years old when he was joining the military. There have been 36 members of his family who have served the military. In 1965, Mr. Williams was drafted into the U.S. Army. He served in the Army for 2 years as a specialist fourth class infantryman. Mr. Williams served in the Vietnam War for 1 year. During the war, John Williams earned the Purple Heart. The Purple Heart was awarded to him because of wounds he received during combat. Mr. Williams' company was attacked as they were trying to pull out of Vietnam. During the attack, he was hit with a white protractus and was burnt badly. Luckily, he made a full recovery and was able to come visit us all these years later. We would like to thank Mr. Williams for his service and sacrifice.
The 5th grade class had an interview with Jim White, a Vietnam veteran from the U.S. Army. Knowing he was probably going to be drafted, he volunteered to serve when he was 18 years old. He served for 3 years. In the beginning, Mr. White was a ground soldier stationed in Vietnam. He later became a military police officer. During his service, he had many experiences. He got to ride on helicopters and tanks. He also got to travel to Guam, Hawaii, Australia, Georgia, and California. He said there were good parts and bad parts about serving. The good parts included making friends, learning about people, and going home. The hard parts included being away from family, losing friends, and not going home for holidays. Mr. White is proud of his services and will remember the friends he served with.
Don Mitchell honorably served in the United States Navy from 1982 to 1993. Mr. Mitchell's rank in the military before discharge was an E6 Petty Officer First Class. He was based out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, specifically Iroquois Point, for 8.5 years. Mr. Mitchell initially began his military career at the age 17 in the delayed entry program. Once he turned 18, he began basic training, which he described as 90% mental and 10% physical. And the best day of training was yesterday.
Mr. Mitchell's initial job within the military was that of HT or hall maintenance technician working as a welder. He went on to become a Navy diver and finally an EOD or Explosive Ordnance Disposal Technician, Mobile Units 14, 7, and 3. He conveyed to us that this took years of special training, and that the training never stopped, as there was always something to be learned. Mr. Mitchell furthered his point by saying that training never stops, and when it does stop, you are digging a hole.
Miss Scarrow served as an E4 petty officer for our Navy. She spent most of her service sailing in the ocean around Southeast Asia. We thank you for your service, Miss Girls.